The results of the Great War and fallout have been disastrous for the economy, but more to the point, not only was it catastrophic for our species as a whole, but it would inspire a cascade of events and infections that would threaten the Homo sapiens race with extinction-level events quite regularly in the following decades and centuries. The reality is, Earth was a paradise to humans, and in our arrogance, we thought that would last forever. Our species would then turn on itself, nuking one another into oblivion. Canonically, it is not known who fired the first shot. Some say it was the Chinese, some say it was Americans, and some say it was even Pam trying to balance out who would attack first by removing the human element, which, if that turned out to be true, maximum oof. Regardless of who did what first and for what reason, this hypothesized to have at least left only about 3 million humans on the planet after the initial Great War, and that's with basically conservative viewpoints. The reality is not every country had the ability to recover or even had vaults in the first place, so it's very likely it's less than 3 million. But if this was the only thing to come out of this era, a nuclear blast followed by a freezing winter, then it may be that humanity could have gotten back on its feet, avoided the irradiated areas, and continued to rebuild towards a more prosperous future. But as the saying goes, war never changes, right? Humanity would not only continue to squabble with one another over territory wars for resources, which, what else is new? But shadow organizations would operate in the background, creating man-made horrors beyond my comprehension, with wildlife also mutating into dangerous creatures, actively tearing people apart in small outposts, and sometimes launching full-scale invasions on larger settlements. With the entire surface marred and destroyed by radiation, and also the Canadians taken out by an accidental alien laser beam, every day easily could be a person's last, as they are one step away from coming across a 11-foot tall lizard that has claws 6 inches in length. It's amazing our species had not yet officially bit the dust, leaving behind a hellscape, with the only record of things being on this rock, or at least us being on this rock, the radiation we left behind due to a bygone generation. But there would be worse things we created that would not only threaten us, but every other living thing that had mutated to survive this terrible environment. As humanity would dig deeper for resources, we would come across something we seemingly had never discovered before, a type of material known as Ultrasite. This exceedingly rare radioactive glass-like ore was first discovered by the atomic mining surfaces underneath the mountains of Appalachia, which also, I've been told it's Apallachia. I live in Georgia, and this dude was like from Colorado telling me this. I'm gonna go with it's Appalachia, but Appalachia. Anyways, it doesn't really matter. I'm gonna go ahead and take a crack at this and say that this thing is straight up coal exposed to radiation with something influencing it. Because, as we know, this area is already abundant with coal resources. Coal, of course, being a mineralized form of decayed plant matter. Anyhow, this ultrasite could only be achieved by using nuclear explosions to dig to a level humanity had never regularly reached. Upon doing so, this ore would be discovered, but it would denote problems later for humanity. First, the properties of it, while allowing humanity to power our technology, if it came into contact with depleted forms, it would melt down, which could lead to many problems, such as a literal meltdown, which is not good for anyone in the surrounding area. But things would only get worse for anyone's survival who was around the mountain range at this point, well past the aggression of other people and literally every animal trying to eat you. The Ultrasite would catch the attention of the shadow government organization known as the Enclave, with one crackhead specifically in control, known as Thomas Eckhart. This man being a little fanatical over the United States, which I can't blame him entirely, but there's a difference between patriotism and being straight brainwashed. He would begin making money moves on developing not only biochemical weapons to be used, but also had his people continue to conduct experiments with very little containment procedures in place that would put more pressure on an already dwindling population and threaten to tip the balance further towards humanity's destruction in the North and South American continents, given enough time. While down in these mines, bats being troglophiles and troglazines, meaning that they spend a lot of time in caves, but typically will exit out to the surface for food, were not spared from the mutagenic effects most animals in the area were hit by. When the nukes fell, their genetic coding would be largely altered, changing them into irradiated creatures and shells of their former selves. However, as the great Dr. Ian Malcolm put it, life finds a way. The bats would continue to live together under the ground, in mines and in cave systems, and go up to the surface as business as usual would continue. As the Enclave began messing with the Ultrasite, eventually they would come into contact with these bats, which gave Thomas Eckhart an idea. Why not combine them with 16 times the biological counters that they were working on to study the effects, as well as give them a leg up would they ever need to release them? Well, this sounds like a really stupid idea from our standpoint nowadays, but as we know, this would be the process that would lead to the extinction of the local populations of humans. But what sort of infection form would the bats be initially introduced to that would cause these issues? Interestingly, a type of irradiated mushroom native to the area would be used to create the first abomination that gives us hints as to how this plague was spread 4 times the distance of just the standard Fallout game, and why it would be successful in even explaining the creation of the Ultrasite itself. So stick with me, it's all interconnected, and we're getting to the plague here soon, but first we need to understand how we even got here. In 2083, these biochemical experiments would continue with regularity deep below the cranberry bog. With each new exposure, it was noted that some would escape to the surface almost as if the containment field was supposed to be made out of some tougher material originally, but instead they went with cheap nylon to contain everything. And despite the fact that they were dealing with infections far beyond their comprehensions, all the tests just worked, mainly because of the known fact that bats appear to be able to withstand infection that humans will drop from in days, with many of these bats breaking containment and going out onto the surface. I am not kidding. It's not a bug, it's a feature. Okay, that's enough Todd Howard references. This mattered very little to those who were in charge, however, as the experimentation would continue on these bats. So before moving on, what do I mean by bats can just resist diseases? Well, it's well known, for instance, that bats are host to hundreds of different viruses. These diseases are living within bats, and yet they are still alive. So how is this possible? Well, bats' immune systems are much more active than humans, and given the proximity and numbers that they live in, their bodies have adapted to the presence of viruses and diseases in general. But what does this mean exactly? Well, we know of roughly at least 10 genes that bats have silenced in their own genome that actually mount pro-inflammatory responses in the presence of sickness. And that may sound bad, but actually it's critical to surviving viruses. If we take a look at Homo erectus coming out of Africa a long time ago, roughly about 900,000 years in the past, we can see the issues within this ancient population. It is hypothesized that coming out of Africa, droves of erectus would have met their end due to inflammatory responses in dealing with mRNA viruses on the Eurasia continent. Their immune system simply would have overreacted, leading to their end. However, some would survive by pure chance and have less of a response to being infected by these viruses, so they had less of an inflammatory response. These that survived would be adapted to the area and then become Neanderthalensis. They seem to possess a certain gene that would stop them from overreacting to the viruses, and now this should be taken with a grain of salt, however, because it's been discovered that not only is there a gene calming inflammation of viruses that appears to hail from Neanderthals, at least in modern humans, but there's also a gene that promotes inflammation on a different chromosome that is believed to also come from Neanderthals that makes the reaction way worse. For instance, it is known to cause pneumonia with the current virus going around that just got finished running amok. Although I say it just got finished because it's completely endemic to our species now, much like the Spanish flu is, and that's just unfortunately the way we are just going to move on in the future. There's really nothing we can do about it at this point. But anyways, the takeaway from this is that inflammation is typically what leads to issues when it comes to being infected by a disease, specifically viruses. With bats' ability to reduce its inflammation well beyond what humans are capable of, this allows them to survive many viruses and then clear them from their bodies. Many of those viruses absolutely body humans and other animals, but the alarming consequence of this is it actually allows it to jump to other species. It should come as no surprise to anyone that bats are mammals, and because they are mammals, the diseases that they have could jump to other mammals. It happens to humans all the time, actually. Many of the cases of rabies, which somebody just mentioned on Twitter, I can't wait to see how you talk about the Scorch plague being rabies. We really made it, man. My content has... I don't know, I like rabies, and even if it's predictable, rabies is interesting, at least, if it doesn't happen to anyone ever, or happen to me. Anyhow, where were we? Yes. Okay, so many of the cases of rabies come from bats biting people in the night and then not even knowing that they were bitten. As within a few weeks then, they will develop the symptoms and it will be too late. Except, unless the Milwaukee Protocol can be administered. Now, what is that, I hear you asking? By the way, if you're just like a purely Fallout guy and this is your first time coming across my channel, this is kind of my thing. I like talking about diseases in real life and how it relates to video games, so this is why I'm getting on tangents. But the Milwaukee Protocol is actually pretty awesome. It potentially is an actual treatment for rabies after symptoms show, which prior we didn't have anyway. Like, you were pretty much gone if you showed symptoms. Essentially, you put a patient in a coma as soon as they show symptoms and arrive at the hospital. From here, you administer antiviral drugs combined with ketamine and amantadine, which gives you a chance at saving them within 8 to 12 days. It should be noted, however, if you are ever bitten by anything, go to the hospital. This protocol helped 11 out of 39 people survive their infection after showing symptoms. That's better than the standard 0 out of 39, but I wouldn't take those odds. It's better to just get your vaccination immediately after you are bitten or scratched. Okay, returning back to what we're actually talking about, bats. So the point to all that information is A, I'm a microbiologist who it gives me great joy to talk about diseases, and 2, bats survive infections that they have themselves by decreasing their inflammation to the actual disease, which usually their bodies will clear, but sometimes this gives the virus enough time to build up a viral load that then it can jump from the bat's body to other species, such as any adjacent animal that, might be in the mines working with them. By 2086, not only had many bats broken containment, but Eckhart would straight up release bats on an unsuspecting population. This could be for a multitude of reasons, the first being the area was actively inhabited by many factions such as the Brotherhood of Steel, Raiders, Responders, and the Free States, and they would all be exposed by these altered bats, with their alpha essentially being known as a Scorch beast. Flying overhead, the different factions would become completely aware that something was wrong with those who were exposed, and with these new bats flying around. However, through the interruption by politics, infighting, and a general distrust for one another, the infection would creep across the mountain range, slowly engulfing and eradicating each population until all of Appalachia would fall quiet. This infection was absolute. Not only did it infect humans, but any animal underneath the wings of the Scorch beast would begin to show symptoms. Which, let's take a look at those, as it gives us an idea of not only the end results of the infection being petrification of the body, which makes way more sense than just looking cool, but also helps to explain the apparent communication with the Scorch beast itself. First, the Scorch beast has an interesting way of attracting all animals around it. Now, this is just apparently a bit of happy coincidence depending on who you ask, but it absolutely is detrimental for any animal caught in its call. The bat is infected with the aforementioned disease, which will fall as infectious droplets onto the animals below. All animals, from deathclaws to super mutants to mirelurks to dogs to regular humans, all are infected by these droplets, meaning it's not just mammals who seemingly can become reservoirs for the disease, but anything that is in the Animalia kingdom. And this is because this isn't like a virus that appears to infect them, but an actual fungal infection, which is much less discerning about what it infects and attempts to break down. Which we will discuss this fungus in a moment, because first we need to look at its pathophysiology and the symptoms it inspires. The infection's progression is a horrific one, and animals as well as humans, which are animals, but you get my point, will have it start simply enough, as physical contact or droplets landing on the skin will seal the initial point of infection for the unwary individual. This surface level infection will begin as burrowing into the skin and spreading rapidly, not unlike ringworm in today's era, which ringworm is not an actual worm, it is a fungal infection. A lot of people do not seem to realize that. Anyhow, the first symptoms of the infection taking hold in the integument system is a discoloration of the skin. It will begin to darken at first, indicating that for some reason pigmentation is building up in these cells. This is regulated by the melanocytes based on your genetic factors. This indicates that the genome of individuals in some ways is being altered at first. As time passes, the DNA of a person will become more corrupted, leading to their skin to alter and change, almost mimicking a type of skin cancer. As the time continues to go, their skin will begin to take on the scent of an earthy, ashen smell, hence why it is known as the Scorched plague. As the skin continues to have this infection reach deeply into the dermal layers, it appears as though some cells will undergo apoptosis, leading to the formation of lesions all over the body. This intense burning sensation will also inflame and irritate the surrounding tissue, as they are said to appear to be smoldering. It actually takes on a lot of the appearance as somebody with leprosy, but that is a bacterial infection, whereas this is a fungal one. It should also be noted at this point that it is just the infection that is causing these symptoms, but the actual disease will begin inspiring changes that we will later see. As the infected skin begins to split open, we can begin to see that this infection is pushing deeper than initially thought. However, this new skin, which is still, dividing and trying to grow because the body is still alive, will have ultrasites begin to form within these wounds and also beneath the skin of a person. To this end, the infection has completely overtaken the individual, and there is no helping them. Now, what's more strange at this point is the behavior they exhibit, which seems to make them ethereally connected to the alpha Scorch beast, but it does actually have possibly roots in reality. But how is this possible? Saying things like never alone and we are one, it's clear they can hear something or know something is with them. But why? So to that end, we have to look at what they are infected with, as it perfectly explains communication between it and the Scorch beast itself. Animals of lesser intellect appear to still behave as they always have. They will become more aggressive to anything in the area, as they do not appear to really be concerned with self-preservation, but instead are directed by the infection they now harbor. With humans, it's more interesting because they will still use force enhancers as well as force multipliers, but as the infection takes deeper root, they may drop these as well, only using their hands and claws that have begun to grow, which I say claws, but really it's just long fingernails. It should also be noted that this is an effective way of transferring the infection to others. Humanity, retaining a little bit of its intellect, continues to state that they are being controlled physically, even if they can communicate with others. So what is that about? Well, from what we can gather, as mentioned previously, the mushroom is the foundational root to the infection as it was tested on irradiated bats. But this mushroom also appears to be associated with the creation of Ultrasite. So when coming into contact with animals, it burrows into the skin and appears to overwhelm the immune system, not unlike how bats' diseases do today. This may also be why the bat had less issues, as its inflammatory response was not as aggressive, which may not cause the fungal infection to activate its trap card and start its own response to protect itself. When exposed to irradiated ore, it appears to sort of change that into Ultrasite, but how is this possible that it's doing both? What makes it so effective, and why would it be able to glean nutrients from inorganic as well as organic material? Well, to answer that, it depends on if it actually really is gleaning nutrients from your organic meat suit at all, or if you're just a medium in which it operates in. There's actually an iron-eating fungus, also commonly known as Talaromyces flavus, which is said to have basically been found in Chinese mines, interestingly enough. It's out there that I believe this mushroom may glean at least some of its adaptations from, and given America's interaction with the Chinese and the knowledge that some Chinese actually did make it to mainland America and set up shop here, a cross-contamination event possibly isn't too far-fetched. This fungus will attach itself to rocks. Upon doing so, it'll release a fairly strong acid. Once that layer of rock has been eaten away, any iron left over will have the fungus then release enzymes upon it, which in turn allows it to break down that iron. After this is done, it will dig further into the rock, release more acid, use enzymes, and then break down that iron, and it rinses and repeats until there is no iron left. Sounds pretty familiar to this disease, doesn't it? The fungus lands on the skin, releases a material that allows it to dig deeper into your skin, because actually your skin is a pretty good barrier to most things. Then it turns it ashen and dark at first, and as it gets deeper into the layers of skin, the damage will increase. But here is where the disease begins to take a turn for the worse, with the physical formation of Ultrasite being a byproduct. As the disease has a deep-rooted hold, I believe it gets to the bones. But I can hear you now saying, Roanoke, I thought it needed radioactive ore to produce Ultrasite. Yeah, it kind of does. One of the little known facts, though, about nuclear explosions is it releases a radioactive isotope known as strontium. Strontium has the horrific habit of getting into your bones and actually is the perfect replacement for calcium. In terms of chemical similarity, it's almost unmatched. It will actually make your bones more dense in the process, but it is radioactive. Given the plentiful contamination of radioactive fallout in an area, along with just the continuous exposure of every living creature in that area, having to drink water which exposes them to more strontium, it's highly likely that this gives the Scorch Plague a horrific capability because it turns every animal into a fantastic host as it fuels this fungus because it eats radioactive ore, or in this case, radioactive strontium. It's feeding on minerals and radiation, both of which are now in your bones and the rest of your tissue, spurring the fungus to continue deeper into your body to seek those nutrients out, not unlike the iron-eating fungus described earlier. And this would have the unintended consequences of linking the Scorch together. It appears to me that the Scorch beast, being the alpha, is infected with the original starting fungus. Now, it's not like this is the original fungus and all of the subordinate funguses, or fungi, I guess is the best way to put it. But really, once that initial infection starts and then spreads, as the experiments continued, the mycelium would then grow under the ground and would continue to spread all over the mountain range, feeding on the nuclear material and minerals such as irradiated coal, which led to an explosive growth under the ground. Those that were infected on the surface would continue to develop the ability to be controlled by the Scorch Beast, as this mycelium relays information through the ground and up to the bodies the fungus controls. And it should also be noted, it's actively still growing because it's been said like some of the mines that the Enclave was looking in were not actually conducive to what they needed, so they were labeled as like dead mines or whatever, and not just the instance in World of Warcraft. But they came back later and found that Ultrasite was actually growing in it, which means the fungus was present in there. But this is why people are able to communicate, but cannot control their bodies, as the fungus itself is deeply embedded in all of their musculature. It may be a spore-like message emitted by the Scorch Beast, or possibly a frequency, but whenever it returns to its nest, it's able to feel and communicate with all the other infection points, thus controlling them. And this is how I believe the infection works. But what about the later stages leading all the way up to petrification? In the absence resistance to stimuli, a person will sit there until directed by the fungus. It may also be that the fungus knows quite literally that you are there based on, let's say you step on some mycelium that you may not notice. This activates the almonds of the infected. When this happens, it will inspire the Scorched to attack. Upon the introduction of new materials into the body by likely eating someone, this will refuel the depleting strontium which the fungus is currently eating in the infected to produce ultrasite. It may also be consuming the iron in a person's blood as well. But if no stimulus ever arrives, the fungus will continue eating the person. It appears that the ultrasite is a waste product of the fungus, which helps to explain the concept of petrification and why the bodies turn completely ashen and fall apart. Petrification itself is the process of filling the pores and tissues, as well as the inter and intracellular spaces with minerals, and then dissolving the organic material away entirely, which is then replaced by more minerals. As the body sits motionless, minerals begin building up in the intracellular matrix. As they sit there longer and longer, they would begin to fuse, and if a person is roused during this, it will mix the fluid and minerals back up, stopping this process from continuing. But if not, eventually it will harden. The fungus will continue to eat other minerals, likely even branching out with the mycelium into the ground, gaining more nutrients, and further connecting into the network below the ground. Eventually, the infected will reach a state of no return where their bodies are depleted of organic tissue, and all that is left is a desiccated, petrified corpse, which houses concentrated radiation, as well as many pieces of ultrasite. Stuck in the last pose that they froze in when all the stimulus around them ceased their action, and by this point, though, their brains are just long gone, as they've been checked out for a while. It is also at this point that all of Appalachia would have either left to escape the infection, or they had been turned themselves, with the Vault Dwellers emerging at the 25-year mark after the nuclear weapons fell. Eventually, they were able to create a vaccine for this fungal infection using research of all the factions, which actually wouldn't be as difficult as you might imagine. You can see the body attempting to actually fight this infection in the early stages, but is overwhelmed by the sheer presence of the fungus, as eventually the immune system is overcome. And this means it's just kind of like any other disease. If you can prime your body to fight it at the beginning, then it won't have a chance of getting a foothold. The vaccine works by introducing your immune cells to the fungus in some altered form, making it weaker and making your body aware of it. Should a droplet land on you in the future, your body will be able to have the ability to deploy antibodies almost immediately upon recognizing it, after dendritic cells take a piece of it back to the lymph nodes, where B cells will then flood the body with counter antibodies. Upon doing so, the fungus will be immobilized and scooped up by macrophages and destroyed before ever getting a chance to spread into your body, thus developing symptoms. You see, Eckhart was an idiot. Releasing this upon the planet with so few humans left is ironically what stopped it from spreading out of control in the first place, given that it wasn't able to spread as quickly due to vast distances between people. But if it was like in today's day and age, it would have definitely gotten a foothold and likely eradicated humans. And this amounts to like a biological nuke after the nukes already fell. I mean, honestly, the man probably needs to catch some lead before he ends up coming up with another stupid idea that helps to just destroy what's left of the human's fragile and tenuous hold on this planet. Guy's not really that good. But anyhow, I want to thank you guys for watching. So what do you think about my hypothesis concerning how it spreads and why it creates ultrasite? Let me know down in the comments. If you enjoyed, then leave a like as awesome as it gets the video out in the algorithm, and subscribing as we're getting close to 1 million subscribers is greatly appreciated. I'll drop my Twitter, Discord, Patreon, and Roanoke Tales channel link, where really this week I guess, we're talking about the Taos hum, which is the weird noise detected by a lot of people and equipment, but nobody really knows where it's coming from. But speaking of patrons, I'd like to thank mine real quick. First, I'd like to thank our astronaut, Rosie Kinch. Thank you very much. I'd also like to thank our astrophysicist, Des Dancer, as well as Zach Smith, and our scientists, Argent Sentinel, Chad the Enjoyer of Scientific Explanations of B-grade horror movies, Florian, Logan Satome, Lucian Dragon, and Tyson Nakanishi. And to the rest of my patrons, I thank you guys as well. Your help goes a long way towards keeping this channel running and is greatly appreciated. Alright, so that's going to do it for me. I hope everyone enjoyed, and I'll see y'all in the next one.